Okay, okay, it's about 6:10, and I can get us started, or Counselor, do you want to say anything to get us started, and then I'll take it from there?
Just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and thank you all for the work you've done on this and sharing with the community. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, so let me go ahead and get our conversation started tonight. I'm Susan Miller. I'm the director of the Tulsa Planning Office, and with me tonight, our team that have been working on this are Travis Hulse. He's a principal planner for the Planning and Design Group. Nathan Foster is a senior planner in current planning. And Amy Ulmer, she is a planner in Planning Design Group. And then Emily Scott, who I'm not sure if she's on the call, but she's someone who is a neighborhood revitalization planner that's running a new program that we have in our office called the Vibrant Neighborhoods Partnership. So she's definitely someone that we hope you get to know. So we are here to talk about these things tonight. So I'll kind of run through this quickly and then we'll get started. First of all, and probably it looks like I do recognize some of you on the attendee list tonight. So I think some of you are familiar with the housing study that was done for downtown and near downtown neighborhoods last year. So Travis, who was I think the primary manager of that consultant work there, he's going to give a summary of that. Also, we administered some housing and community surveys about different housing types in neighborhoods, and he will give you some of those results. Also mention some of the other city policy and adopted plans that really address these types of missing middle housing. And if you're not familiar with that term and what that means, that will be discussed as well. Introduction to missing middle housing, what it means, what it is, what it means for us in this context. And then what we've been working on, this group, our team on the call, we've been working on the concept of an overlay that would facilitate the development of those types of housing in the neighborhoods. Specifically, we want to discuss with the neighborhoods that were part of the downtown housing study to see if this is something those neighborhoods would like in their neighborhoods. And then we'll talk about what the next steps are after this. And then we're going to open it for question and answer. So this is a new, a little bit of a new format. It's not your typical Zoom meeting. This is a webinar format. We had a weird hacking thing last week. So this format, it keeps everyone on mute. If you do want to, sorry, my dog just jumped up here. If you have a question during the presentation, if you could put it in the question and answer part of the screen, you can see that at the bottom. And then if you also, once we're having the discussion, if you want to speak, is there a raise your hand feature in here? If you want to do that, we can unmute you and then hear from you then. So, but there's about 35 slides or so. So it'll probably be about 30 to 40 minutes for us to go through that. So once we get through that, we definitely want to spend the rest of our time talking to you about all those things, answering your questions, taking your comments, hearing what you think. Of course, we don't have to be here 2 hours. It's really however long you all want to be here and how much information you want to hear. Sorry. Anything else that I need to mention before you get started, Travis?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Travis.
Thanks. And yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. The topic of missing middle housing may not be new to many of you. And in fact, it's a conversation that we've had in the past with a lot of the different planning surveys and small area plans and the comprehensive plan that you may have participated in. So we'd actually like to start tonight by posting a brief question, a poll for everyone who's participating to respond to. And that is, which of the following planning processes or surveys did you participate in? This will give us a good sense kind of who's already participated in this and, kind of aware of some of these topics and different things, and maybe who's new to the conversation a little bit. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a few seconds to complete that, we'll give everyone a minute or two, and then we'll share the results of that so we all kind of know who's in the room and go from there. Interesting. Okay, so some of you participated, some haven't. So there may be some, some details in here. We're not going to cover everything that's, ever been done or discussed as part of those planning processes and surveys. We are going to spend a little bit of time highlighting a few of those details. Everything is available online. And in fact, we will follow up with an email at the end of tonight with links to all of these things. So if you want to read those a little bit more and get a better understanding of whether it's the housing study itself or the small area plan, we'll make those available to you. So thanks for that. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the housing study. And, a couple of you have participated in that or were aware of that. So the housing study was probably the most recent initiative that was conducted from our office. We worked with a project consultant out of St. Louis, and it was primarily focused on the market aspect of housing. So really looking at the demand for housing within this boundary that you see on your screen, within both the downtown, within the IDL, as well as many of the neighborhoods surrounding downtown. It was an update to an effort done in 2010 that led to a lot of implementation initiatives downtown specifically. But as a part of this housing study, we really broadened our horizon, looked to the neighborhood surrounding downtown, and wanted to focus our implementation efforts within many of the neighborhoods that you live in. And so the study did a lot of different things, looking at the perspective of the market, trying to understand, again, the demand based on employment numbers, population, the cost of land, the financial aspects of it all, and gave us a good sense of what we could expect. And with that information, we started to ask ourselves a lot of these questions about, is there a gap in the market for housing? How does that look at different income levels? Is there support for development of housing within many of these existing neighborhoods? New housing in an existing neighborhood can be kind of scary, so we want to make sure there's support for that and that we can do that in an appropriate, compatible kind of a way. Also support from the development community. Are these projects that development, local and national and just otherwise interests are interested in being able to bring to life? And what barriers do we see associated with all of those things? What benefits or concerns are there? So the housing study tackled a lot. On the next slide, we kind of break down what that demand looked like at the conclusion of that effort. And what's really most important about this slide is really to highlight that there's a demand across the board. So this is a 10-year demand, and it adds up to around 3,000 or so units. And it's across the various income levels of affordable, so less than $34,000 a year, to workforce, which is your $34,000 to $67,000 a year, moderate, upscale, and luxury. And as you can see, while there's spread across the income levels, there's also really kind of a focus within that affordable, workforce, moderate level of housing. And that's, again, specific to this project area that we were looking at. So this is important because it helps us understand that we need to be looking at housing that can address these gaps specifically. A lot of the neighborhoods that we're meeting with, you're the third group that we're meeting with. We've recently met with the Pearl District last night. And then the night before that, we met with Riverview and Cherry Street. And everybody kind of has a different sense for what is best for their community. And so that's what tonight is all about. Tonight is about giving you a chance, those of you who've been able to join us in the Crutchfield neighborhood, to talk with us and give us your insight and your perspective on housing, specifically housing within your neighborhood, and what you feel would be appropriate. As a part of the housing study, we did ask those questions a little bit in a survey. It doesn't look like maybe everybody got a chance to participate in that, and that's okay. I think, again, this is a chance for us to engage you in different ways and provide different opportunities. Not everybody loves surveys. I'm certainly not one of them. Unless I'm getting a free hamburger at McDonald's, maybe then I'll take a survey. But this is a survey that was done to show different housing typologies that you might consider. And the question was really about, what would you think would be something you might move into, or be okay with being built, kind of just generally. And all different types were on the survey, these exact images to kind of give you a sense. And this is what we heard. So citywide, we had about 1,700 people respond to that question, and they're on the screen. So if such a building with all of those pictures were located within downtown or the surrounding neighborhoods, would you be interested in this type of building? And this is what we heard. So again, this is everyone who participated in that, which included lots of folks within the neighborhoods around downtown, also included people in the city and a few people outside of the city of Tulsa. So micro units, high-rise apartments, modern walk-up apartments, mixed-use apartments weren't as popular, but there was a pretty wide diversity of housing types that people said they'd be interested in. Maybe a different type of an apartment, not density and scale and mass. Homes were pretty popular, but we also saw things like duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes. So that's all, again, very important. As we understand the market side of it, it's really probably more important we understand that for the people who live in these neighborhoods, what types of things they would like to see, what would they be interested in. So specific to the group we're talking to tonight, which is Crutchfield, wanted to share with you kind of how those survey results broke down by people who really live in this neighborhood or closer to this neighborhood. The survey results we broke down kind of in these highlighted shaded yellow areas. So this shows you a portion of what includes Crutchfield, also includes other portions of the Dunbar, Joe Louis neighborhoods, Greenwood, University Park, and Legacy and the Heights. So pretty similar, but some differences. So there's even less people interested in things like high-rise apartments, micro units, modern walk-up apartments, basically every kind of apartment. Less than 50% said that they would be interested in that type of building. There was some support for townhomes, detached homes, and duplex, triplex, quadplex was pretty close to about 50%. And the other zip code that also contains a portion of Crutchfield and a lot of the Pearl neighborhood area. So again, people who participated in this survey that told us this is where they live. This is what they said. So this one, there's maybe a little bit more of an interest in some of those other housing types, including some more apartment options, and the duplex, triplex, quadplex definitely kind of rose to the top or closer to the top of this list. So we're gonna give you all a chance that didn't get to participate in that survey, or want to give us some thoughts on how you feel about housing built in your neighborhood here in just a minute. But I wanted to share these just to kind of set us up for the conversation that we have tonight about this idea of missing middle housing and what that means. So the priority action that came out of the housing study talked about removing barriers to missing middle development. Looking at the regulations, considering tools to address that if there are barriers. That's what our office was kind of asked to do, to spend some time looking at the zoning code specifically, having conversations with the neighborhoods, with developers, all of those that are kind of in on this conversation to understand what barriers might exist. So want to spend just a brief moment to kind of define what missing middle means. That's a term that's not necessarily obvious or real clear to everyone. So what we mean when we say missing middle, because we're going to use that term more and more throughout tonight, this graphic does a good job of kind of explaining that visually. It includes a lot of those housing types that we heard in the survey that people would have an interest in, being supportive of: duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments, townhomes, bungalow courts. The reason why they're called missing middle, it suggests that this housing type that was pretty popular before mid-century, but then really as we've shifted and focused more and more in our development on detached homes, and that type of home is really what you see in most of the city of Tulsa, predominantly detached homes. You do see a lot of these others mixed in and around, but kind of missing, saying that we haven't seen those for quite some time. And middle, just size-wise, they kind of fit between that detached home and large multifamily complex. So this is what we mean when we talk about missing middle. We also kind of asked some similar questions more recently in another survey. We love to survey people, and I hope people don't get worn out. It's really, in our COVID world, one of the best tools we have right now. So we appreciate you spending time to respond to those. But this was a separate survey that really talked about how people felt in their neighborhoods, potentially seeing new housing brought into their neighborhoods. So as you can see here, and I'm going to kind of highlight the top three here in a minute, these were all the things that people said were potentially beneficial aspects. Over 90% agreed that one of the aspects could be replacing or rehabilitating older, poorly maintained homes. At the bottom of that spectrum, you see affordable rental properties. That may be not something that was as much of an interest to people. And again, this is citywide. And we do have these results down more at the neighborhood level. So the top three, you can kind of see here that many communities and in the areas kind of right around the middle of that graphic in the word Tulsa, that you see highlighted in blue, is where people said that they were somewhat interested or very interested in these three things, which are efficient use of infrastructure. So infill has an opportunity, and new housing has an opportunity in existing neighborhoods to utilize the water and sewer and roads and all of that infrastructure that's already there. It doesn't require additional infrastructure, which is great. Housing price options, it opens up new options. Different housing types have different square footage, different density. Some are rental, some are owner. It just opens the door for all types of people to be able to live in these neighborhoods who are already living here, and maybe their life has changed. They don't have kids anymore, or they're having kids, or whatever it may be. So that's another one of the top three benefits that people said. And then the third one was kind of just that, what I said, expanded choices for those families and lifestyles. So these are those benefits. One thing I wanted to just touch on real briefly, I mentioned early on. So this isn't really a new topic necessarily. One of the planning efforts that was done with the Crutchfield neighborhood back in 2019, there was a couple of goals that spoke specifically to this idea of missing middle or infill, bringing new housing to existing neighborhoods. So this goal 5 talked about increasing housing choices available in Crutchfield, and it even lists out some of those same things, and you see that term missing middle, single family homes, also cottage houses, clustered homes, narrow lot homes, townhomes, all sorts of different options that people are interested in kind of expanding that choice in Crutchfield. And then another part was maintaining housing affordability. And again, affordability is something that can be accomplished, especially through different options of small scale, different types of housing. So it's a good reminder that these are conversations that many of the people who maybe couldn't join us tonight seem to agree about for Crutchfield, for their neighborhood. So we just wanted to kind of point that out. Also, just briefly mention that the city of Tulsa's comprehensive plan, which again is citywide, a very similar theme. So robust mix of housing types, and we get that housing affordability, but especially focusing in on low income and workforce affordable housing options. So I hope that doesn't seem too repetitive or redundant, but there's a lot that can be done through opening different housing options and choices in these neighborhoods. That's why we want to spend a little bit of time talking to you tonight about one of the tools that is available to us here in the Tulsa Planning Office, a part of our zoning code. I'm going to turn the time over to Nathan to talk about that tool, which is an overlay, and we'll take it from there. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. So in 2018, we updated our overall zoning ordinance, and it incorporated a new tool called a special area overlay. The tool has been used a few times already. In fact, even in some areas where the healthy neighborhood overlay has been applied, you guys may have been familiar or been a part of that process. But essentially what the overlay does is allows us to tailor zoning to a specific intent or need in a geography that we define, versus as some of you might know, we have an array of underlying zoning districts in our zoning code right now that go from single family residential up to commercial and industrial type zoning districts. And so when thinking about something like this, where we're trying to meet the intent or recommendations of some planning efforts that have gone on, the overlay makes it a lot easier to go in and start to really amend those zoning regulations and meet those goals without individually going through and trying to rezone every property within the overlay or within the geography of the neighborhood. This also can help us prevent from changing any of the existing regulations that may apply to an underlying property. If there is a use that maybe isn't taking advantage of the overlay, we want to make sure that we're also not creating any issues for existing property owners. And so the overlay is very flexible in that way. So as we learned what the recommendations were from these different planning efforts and started to look at our existing zoning ordinances, we learned that there's really a lot of barriers already in place that prevent a lot of this new housing development from occurring in these neighborhoods. They're usually restricted to some of the more higher density multifamily districts. They're not permitted at all within some of these single family residential districts that we have. And then they have some more intense lot regulations that often create barriers because they can't be built on smaller lots like exists in a lot of these downtown area neighborhoods. So we started looking through the zoning code and trying to define what all those barriers were and kind of how we could start to address those through the idea of an overlay. So starting with the uses, I'm going to go in depth with each of those different building types, and it's going to relate back to what Travis presented earlier in that slide that showed you some of the housing typologies we asked people about in those surveys. But then we began to assess what those existing lot patterns look like in some of these neighborhoods and wanted to understand how we could adjust those regulations to allow for some of these uses in those smaller lots without forcing property owners or folks that were wanting to develop something like this through a process of variances and getting changes of the zoning code or rezonings every time something like this wanted to occur. The final piece was really looking at parking requirements and how those can prevent development of some of this missing middle housing due to the requirement often exceeding maybe what the need is for some of the housing types that we're talking about. So we're looking at maybe reducing those minimum parking requirements by a certain amount. 50% was kind of our first run at saying this might actually help to alleviate the biggest issues we've seen. But as we hear from neighborhoods, obviously we're going to continue to tweak and develop this overlay so that we make sure as we start allowing, or if we're going to allow some of these uses in the neighborhood, that they're done appropriately and that they can fit within the context of the neighborhood without causing any sort of injury to the neighbors who are there already. So what I'm going to do now is kind of explain each of these building types as they're defined in our zoning code. So townhouses were a first that we discussed. These are really very similar to just single family homes. They exist as one unit on one lot. The primary difference here is that they're in attached buildings. So the units all share walls along a common lot line. And that helps to add more units in a place where typically maybe only one home or two homes could have been built. You could take that and create a row of townhouses that may be able to be developed on 4 lots there. And so that really gives you some opportunities to insert some density while really still maintaining a nice neighborhood character. Duplexes are another really common housing type, and these really exist in a lot of places already. There may even be some existing in some of the neighborhoods we're talking about. Duplexes are 2 units allowed to be on a single lot. And so as it stands today, a lot of our single family residential zoning districts really prohibit use to a single unit on a single lot. This helps to add an additional unit that could either be like an income unit for a property owner, could be a rental unit, and adds to the ability to get some affordable housing within the neighborhood while still maintaining that character. So as we flip through these next few slides, these are some examples that Daniel Jeffries with our office did to try and illustrate where these duplexes can tuck in and really how they match the character of some of the existing single family homes that already exist in these neighborhoods. And so some of you may even be familiar with some duplexes nearby or in the neighborhood. As it stands today, to get to a duplex on a single family lot like this, it requires a special exception, which is an additional process and approval that has to occur through the city's Board of Adjustment. And what we're thinking is if we would like to basically meet some of the same neighborhood character while adding a few of these additional units, a duplex is a really good option to do that and can very much fit within the single family neighborhoods. Cottage house developments are a little bit of a new concept. There's not very many examples, I don't think, that have been developed here in town, but it has been used broadly nationwide. And it develops somewhat of a village concept with detached single units oriented around an individual courtyard or a common space. This allows for more units, again, to be fit into a single lot, but it does in a way that really creates more of a neighborhood feel, creates some walkable space, and tries to maintain more open space in a neighborhood than just lotting single family homes adjacent to a street the way you would typically see. Multi-unit houses were a new building type added to our code when we updated it. It goes a little bit above a duplex, where as it allows 3 to 4 units to exist within a single structure. This particular use comes with additional guidelines for how it can be implemented. And the intent of those rules is to really try and make sure that if someone were to develop something like this in a neighborhood, they would do it and it would still match a home character versus looking more like an apartment building. So they require a single street facing entry that's oriented out towards the sidewalk or to the street, and the internal units would all be entered from inside. Stepping just a little bit above multi-unit house and duplexes would be our apartment classification. As it stands today, apartments are regulated really based upon how much lot area exists underneath that particular development. And some of the multifamily districts change that lot area requirement so that fewer units or more units can be allowed on a smaller lot. We're trying to basically balance apartments within some of these neighborhoods to try and match some of what already exists today, some sixplexes or some triplex, quadplex type units, but really trying to find a balance for how many units would be appropriate in each of these different neighborhoods that we're talking about. Looking at 12 units really seems to be what we think would be a good maximum in some places. We've already heard some feedback from folks that think that may be a little bit too much. We've also heard feedback that said maybe there could be more. So we're going to continue to look at that and try to understand how that best works within the neighborhood. A few more examples just coming across the screen are some of those types of uses. So a triplex would be like an apartment. It would be classified as such. And it's similar to multi-unit house, but The difference would be that each entry is located outside for all of the different units. So everyone has their own private entry versus entering through like a common area or common space. This apartment building is actually an example of something that already exists in town at 16th and Quaker near Cherry Street. The Orcutt apartment building is a sixplex apartment with a single entry. And as you can see, it's modeled to basically meet the height and the character of those homes next door to it, while providing that variety of housing type and affordability that may come with those additional types of uses. So as Travis said earlier, we want to go ahead and gauge the support from these neighborhoods and the folks that we're talking with on those different housing types. We've given you some parameters so you can understand really how many units we're talking about within each of those types of uses. And we've taken that apartment use and broken it down into 4 tiers so that you really have the option to pare down if you don't think we've proposed too many, or to go for that maximum of 12 units that we originally looked at. So we'll give you just a few minutes here to respond to this question and just kind of gauge what you guys are thinking on this, and then we're going to move into some discussion. So
Yeah, and while people are filling out this poll, I haven't seen anything pop into the question and answer yet, which is kind of where we're headed next. If you have questions, anything you'd like to discuss, we're going to open it up to kind of talk through things a little bit. Anything that either I talked about or Nathan talked about, or even just in general that comes to mind as we're talking about this, is kind of open for discussion. So throw those in the Q&A at the bottom, and once we're done here with this survey, I think we maybe have one more slide and then we'll jump into that. So we'd love to chat on whatever issues you might want to talk about a little bit more.
all right, looks like the results popped up. So really sounds like the triplex, quadplex, 4 units, 2 units really took a lot of the answers here. Everyone was really in favor of that particular type of use. Cottage house development still had a really significant support. Apartments started to fall off just a little bit. 6 and 8 units got just a few votes, with anything above that really taking in nothing. So that kind of tells us, you know, that the real appetite in this particular area or with this neighborhood may be that those lower unit type building types that we described or that we went through. So we appreciate you guys taking the poll and giving us that feedback as we continue to kind of vet through how we treat each different geography with the overlay if we propose something, and that helps us to try and craft something that's appropriate. I think if you want to go on to the next slide here, I want to, before we go straight into discussion, I do want to just kind of cover the overlay process so that no one leaves this meeting concerned that we're running ahead or charging ahead right now with something that's going to change and all of a sudden these things will be allowed. There will be more engagement as we work through this process and as we develop an overlay. The way an overlay is adopted in the city of Tulsa is a 2-step process. So it first has to be incorporated into our zoning code because it is essentially developing a new zoning designation for the city. So that text amendment goes through the process first, and then once it's actually adopted into the text, it can go out and we can amend the zoning map to apply those standards that were adopted. And in that process, the neighborhood becomes engaged when we start talking about map amendments. There's significant prior engagement with the neighborhoods to discuss the draft of any overlay that we did come up with. There's also additional notices and things that give neighbors the opportunity to participate as that goes through the public hearing process. It's a 2-step approval. So it first goes through our Tulsa Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, who will make a recommendation from that point on to the city council, who would make a final decision on adoption and application of that overlay. It doesn't happen rapidly. It's something that would take some time, and that throughout the process, we would definitely be working to keep the neighborhood engaged so that we're not surprising anyone, and so that we can continue to hear feedback from not just the folks we've talked to in these meetings, but maybe those that weren't able to participate and who have comments that they'd like to provide. On this page, you have a few links that we've shown just to keep you guys in the loop as things move forward. So obviously we have a lot more meetings planned for this month in regards to a lot of different planning topics. The missing middle particularly is going to be continuing through next week as we meet with a few other neighborhoods. But those websites and that Facebook page are really good places and sources of information for you all, so you can stay in tune with what we're doing and what our office is working on. And hopefully if things continue to progress as we're hoping, then you'll be in the loop with us as we keep moving forward. So with that, we'll move it into the Q&A slide. And on the slide, there's a few questions for prompting. If you guys want to respond to those in the chat, we're happy to take feedback on those. But if you also have questions for us, that's where the Q&A feature is very helpful. We can field them one at a time and we can just discuss them. And like Susan mentioned at the beginning, I think there is an option for you to raise your hand if you'd like to talk. And I think by default, everyone is muted, but if you do have something you'd like to discuss, then just do the hand raise, and that way we can call on everybody and have those conversations. So with that, we'll kind of just start fielding these the Q&As. So it looks like Jamie has got one here in the chat, and I think if I hit answer live, it shows all of you guys the questions. But the question is, how will the drafting of the overlays be affected by the comp plan update process? I think that it would be, they'll work concurrently. They're not dependent on one another. However, I do think that the comp plan update process, as we continue public engagement, it's only going to benefit us to hear more from the public and from these neighborhoods as we continue to think about how we implement these recommendations. So both processes can continue, and I think that we'll only find support in our update to the comprehensive plan for these concepts, given how repeated they have been over time. So yeah, those will continue to go forward, and we encourage everyone to be involved in that comp plan update process as well. That goes much more beyond just this missing middle topic and into an array of topics that our office is adopting and hoping to adopt new policy for moving forward. So that's a great question as well. I will say that this process of starting to develop an overlay based on the housing study and based on the survey, that was initiated by City Council. So they have shown some support for us to initiate this effort and to begin researching what might work in these neighborhoods. We haven't necessarily been through a planning commission discussion with this yet, Susan. I don't know that I could speak to whether there's support or not on the planning commission for something like this, but we would certainly be starting to engage them as we move forward in the process. So.
And Nathan, we did have a work session to discuss this, and it seemed that there was support, but.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, we did. It was a go-to meeting.
And I know we've talked about the housing study on a couple of occasions. So, and I think the Planning Commission will really look to, I mean, you know, as the engagement process that we had and people that show up at the meeting to really understand if the neighborhood is in support of it or not. That'll make all the difference in the world to the Planning Commission if they feel like there's support.
Yeah, I think what we presented to them was really a conceptual idea at the moment, but it was, I don't remember getting any negative feedback from them on the discussion. It was really mostly all supportive or just inquisitive on what we were doing. I'm seeing just in the chat some discussions going on as well. Julia, you mentioned that there are some duplexes and more shotgun houses in the area, and we're definitely aware of some of these uses existing within these neighborhoods. And over time, as the zoning code has evolved and changed, a lot of them have kind of found themselves in a non-compliant way because the zoning doesn't allow for whatever it is anymore. So this also helps to kind of relieve some of those property owners so that they can do necessary improvements and renovations and things if they wish on those buildings without jumping through any sort of hoops to try and relieve any rules that have changed since it was originally developed. So we're really hopeful that this is going to help in that situation as well. So if the overlay is approved for the text amendment, which is the first step, it doesn't go into effect on any neighborhoods yet. Once it's proposed on a specific geography and we start that map amendment process, that really can last, you know, anywhere from 120 days to much longer, depending on how much public engagement we participate in leading up to that actual decision. But the map amendment is a typical zoning map amendment once it's going through the process. So it's a TMAPC meeting followed by a council meeting and then an ordinance that would be effective 30 days once it's published. So generally we say 120 days for a zoning change to take full effect once it's actually in the process. One thing just for discussion's sake too, we encourage you guys, if examples of things that you do think are appropriate or are good examples of housing that exist in your neighborhoods, to share those with us. We are always looking to find those examples in town that we can use to really support these concepts and to kind of illustrate how these things work with neighborhoods. So if it's not today, all of our contact information is now right there up on the screen. So we're always welcoming more comments and more feedback, whether it be via email or if you want to give us a call, or if you'd like to have another discussion separate from this meeting and you just want to talk through some more of this, we're always happy to arrange that. So please feel free to take down our information and contact us if you need anything.
Yeah, if there's any other questions, not seeing any come in. I think maybe a few of us will stick around for 5-10 minutes just in case folks want to chat a little bit more, but really appreciate everyone attending and participating. We will send an email with some follow-up links to a lot of the things that we talked about tonight. I know it's a lot to understand, and probably other questions as you look into some of those plans and studies and things of that nature. So we'll be sending that to you here in the next couple of days. Encourage you to participate as we move forward, and we'll let you know more about those opportunities, like Nathan said. So other than that, if you are ready to head on out and enjoy the rest of your evening, feel free, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.